Okay, all set, Chris.
All right, thanks Barb, and welcome everyone to the November 9th, 2020 meeting of the Operations Work Group. Barb, did we end up with any registrations for public appearances?
No, there are none.
All right, since there are no registrations, we'll move on to the agenda. Before diving into the agenda, I wanted to take a moment to recognize that this is our first board meeting since the November 3rd election. And as I think everyone on the Zoom call is aware, voters generously approved both of the MMSD referendum questions on the ballot. Specifically, 76% of voters approved the operating referendum and nearly 80% approved the facilities referendum. This is overwhelming. I believe these are the highest percentages of voter approval of any of the school referenda in Wisconsin's November election. So as a board, we want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to our community for supporting MMSD Public Schools. And I'd like to invite Dr. Carlton Jenkins to say a few words.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say, yes, that was the highest number. I had an opportunity to speak with the Big Five superintendents, and we all were just a little friendly about it, but definitely everyone recognized the support of our community towards this referendum with both questions. I just tell you, it's very humbling to walk in. We all knew that Madisonians would step up as they always have in the past, but to step up like this during a pandemic, and it was just phenomenal. And I just cannot congratulate the board enough on your bold vision last spring when we felt to pause for a moment and then to come back out, and the leadership of Ms. Kelly Rupa and Chaz Wise and and the other members of the staff, the administration, the overall community support was just phenomenal. This investment in our children is an investment not only for MMSD, but an investment for our community. So I thank you for pausing tonight to just acknowledge the support that we've received here. It's really so much appreciated from everyone that I've talked to in the community. And the energy, I've received so many emails, and in all the meetings I've gone in, the community really has just expressed their support for us in a lot of ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Jenkins. And I just want to echo that I believe I speak for the whole board when I say that it is absolutely humbling to see our community come out in support of our public schools at this level during a pandemic. So thank you so much. Ananda.
Thank you so much, Chris, for providing us this pause to reflect on this immense support. I just want to echo everything that everyone has said around the gratitude to our community, particularly during this time of a lot of distress, excuse me, and uncertainty. But there's no way we could have done this if it wasn't for a cadre of dedicated staff that had been working relentlessly for over a year and a half on all of this, and we're able to really effectively and strategically guide us and additional data due to the complexity of COVID. And then I also wanted to elevate, like, all of you all have done also amazing work in our communities and doing a lot of virtual calls and virtual meetings. And then in particular, Gloria, that jumped into this president role and have not had 1 week of calmness, and it's just been adding on over this past year. And then I'm sure with the support of her VP, our VP, Ali Mudro as well, who has been having her finger on a pulse of our community as well. So I just want to elevate deep gratitude to all of you moving us for all this. And also, I'm not going to name any staff because I know there's a lot of staff that worked behind the scenes. So I don't want to make sure that I want to miss anyone, but you all know who you are and the amount of work that you all have put onto making sure that on November we were celebrating not just what's happening in the presidential ways, but what's happening at the local level. So thank you with all my heart to all of you.
Thanks, Ananda. All right. Oh, Gloria?
Yeah, thank you, Ananda. I just, a lot of thank yous, right? I mean, this was definitely a team that worked really hard together. The board stuck strong. We were focused. We each did our part, and I'm just so honored to be working alongside you all and doing the hard work that we do every day for our students. Kudos to Chris Carusi, who really spent a lot of time organizing us and just, telling us where we needed to be, really organizing us and strategizing. I mean, we met with Melinda from Foundation Madison Public Schools every Friday for strategy, and Chris Carusi really did a lot of our organizing. So thank you for Chris for stepping up as our operations chair. And our foundation for Madison Public Schools really did come through for us. They stepped in and just brought together all of our community partners to get behind us. And it was just amazing. On election night, I could not have felt more prouder to be a part of this community who care so much about our students and our education, our public schools. So thank you very much to everyone who continue to support our public schools. I think we are all an example of what comes out of our schools, right? I think each of us have, come out of our public schools. We have our children in our public schools, and this is the end result, right? And so thank you to our community for investing in us and our students every day. Thank you. Pass it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Gloria. And this really was a team effort. And at the end of the day, voters were a part of that team. Our community was a part of that team. And we're just so grateful that our community values our children so deeply. Moving on, let's see. We are going to defer the vote on the minutes because the minutes went up late today, and I think the board and the community need more time to review them before we approve them. So we're going to move on to the agenda. We have 2 agenda items tonight. The main agenda item is an enrollment report. We're going to discuss enrollment modeling and projections for the 2021-22 school year. As Andrew will explain, COVID complicates this modeling immensely. Enrollment projections are central to the budget work we will do in 2021, starting at the January operations work group meeting. And the enrollment projections impact both our anticipated revenue and our expenditures, including the staffing allocations that we budget for in February. For those reasons, it's really important that at this point, all of us understand this year's budget model, including the assumptions it's based on. It's also important that we understand the work that will happen between now and the January enrollment count to confirm and possibly revise those assumptions, as well as the enrollment projections we're going to talk about tonight. So even though there's not an immediate decision associated with the enrollment report, this is an absolutely essential foundational piece to the budget work we're going to start doing in January. And second, we're going to get an update on the collaborative work that MTI and the MMSD administration are doing on the surplus and layoff language in the employee handbook. So with that context in place, Andrew, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Chris. We'll do a screen share in a second, but I do want to say a couple of things before we do that. So first, I've been involved in a couple of these projection conversations in the past, and we've never seen one quite like this. That's an understatement, to say the least. And you'll see that this document's referred to as current insights. So as Chris described, we're going to be keeping our radar on and engaging in some pretty concerted efforts to monitor how our enrollments are going and see how things sway between now and the beginning of the next school year. Now, I'm going to ask Grady Brown to turn his camera on so you can take a virtual bow here. I'm going to point out that we have a very, very complicated enrollment projection model. Complicated even further by staff turnover, and Grady came out of the wings to address these needs, and did it during COVID-19 with all of the complications that then adds from a bedroom. So this is the world that we're in, and I just wanted to point out Grady really came through. If he's willing, I'll ask him to, I don't know, do a virtual bow by turning his camera on so he can give a wave. But thank you, Grady. So if anybody needs to forward congratulatory notes, that's your guy this time. All right. So Barb, I'll ask that we go to a screen share, and I'll walk us through. Now, I will be pausing after our assumptions because this is, while it's not a lot of decisions tonight, this certainly does have implications on the work that's moving forward. So the first slide then is a key summary of key findings. So we have put the third Friday count in front of the board before. As you all know, that our enrollment declined by about 1,000 students, or about 3.8%. Looking at our projections moving forward, and we'll talk through the methodology that we use to determine this, but we do see a small increase, about 74 students. So kind of a typical increase from one year to another for next year. So increasing back up a little bit then to 25,952 is our bottom line for 4K through 12. Now, it is key that we review some assumptions here because evolving circumstances will have an impact on this. So the last note that we have on here is that these are going to change, and change in ways that our previous projections locked into budget decisions have not been subject to such change. But I want folks to know that we have a reliable model in front of us, and one that we are comfortable with in terms of the foundation that it's telling us, and the process that we'll use to review it and report back to the board what we are seeing in this ever-evolving situation. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways for the work group tonight. A key assumption here, and we'll spend a little more time on this one, is that we would be offering hybrid or in-person instruction next year that removes a disincentive for families to leave or pause on coming to the district. One thing that we do not have yet that we will look at based on second Friday counts is calculating a return rate, and then revisit our projections based on who may come back under those circumstances. To help us understand that, we'll be issuing a survey of our leavers, folks that have had a previous relationship with the district, and then we're going to ask reasons why they had chosen another path, what's informing those decisions, and see how we could get some ideas of ways to proceed. So not only informing our return rate to add to the model, but then also programmatically might have impacts as well. But again, all of this is a very reasonable foundation based on work that we've done internally over the years and some consulting with the UW's applied population. The next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the report itself. It's in board docs tonight, of course, and linked on the RPEO website. Offers some background, outlines our assumptions, provides the next steps we'll talk through, bit of a history, next year's projection, and then some appendices to really dig into some of these topics. So next slide then gives us a visual of how different schools were impacted by COVID-19. Now, we had 1,000 students, roughly fewer this year than last, and that did not play out evenly across our district, and we thought it would be good to provide this view for the board. So you see some of our high schools, for example, losing, some of them gaining. Most of our elementaries did lose students in this array here, and each of them has some of their own dynamics, and some of these dynamics we'll continue to monitor. In some cases, such as Leopold or Alice, you do have a brand new school going up from Oregon, an elementary school there. Shorewood, we may be seeing implications because of restricted travel for international students at the UW. A whole host of things can play out differently for each of these schools, so it's important for us to look at each of those schools and investigate some of those hypotheses. The next slide then provides a demographic breakout. We typically provide this as part of our standard report. This time we've broken it out for elementary, middle, high for English language learners, low income, students with disabilities, and advanced learners, as well as by race ethnic categories. So highlights we've got at the bottom here, a slight increase among ELLs at high school. The percent of advanced learners, students identified as AL, decreased at elementary, and students who identified as white also decreased at elementary. The next slide is then where we're going to go through this and then pause on our primary assumptions to see what questions the board might have. So the very first is coming back to this idea of offering hybrid or all-in-person instruction at the beginning of 2021 or early enough where it is not a disincentive for families to choose another district or choose another path. The reasons that we've explained to the board before and as are attached to this the full report, we know that families simply moved out of the district to another district in the state. Some families moved out of the country, some families moved to another state. Some chose to homeschool their students, their children. Others are now attending private parochial schools for a whole variety of reasons. So what we're looking at as our primary assumption here is that this COVID increase, this COVID effect is really a one-time phenomenon, and that we would not see the same reduction, for example, next year, but a continuation from a new normal and then along conventional lines for most of our grades. So then kindergarten and 4K are a special call out because of this first assumption around hybrid and all-in-person instruction, eliminating any disincentives. We then have in the model kindergarten and 4K reverting to a birth rates model. So we look at births 4, 5, 6 years prior, see what typically matriculates from birth to these early grades for us. And what we are doing is simply keeping that methodology in place. So this is the first two are really related on here. And what we may have then, and we have to explore this a little bit further, is some return of students either during this school year yet or next. So we're making an assumption under the current model that grades 1 through 12 that have left the district are not going to return. Now we'll build up our understanding of that dynamic throughout the school year and then come up with a reasonable return rate that might be applied to the projection model after Second Friday. Now, these in cohort kind of in conjunction kind of give us a pretty even projection in terms of methodology. So we have these first two assumptions, we may be overestimating the number of students that would be joining us next year. And with this last one, we might be underestimating. So these two things together get us a pretty typical increase and one that really does look about right. And I'll provide some evidence on that in the next slide. But for now, let's pause, come off a screen share, and then see what questions you may have around the assumptions that we're making tonight. Oh, and Chris, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Let's pause for take some questions. Go ahead and raise your hand if you've got any questions at this point. Ananda.
Just real quick, can you talk a little bit more about the data slides? Because I really appreciate the expansiveness of what we're looking at, but I don't know if I really I'm really following what the slides are telling us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The slides so far are just additional detail on today's enrollment. So this is the additional information we promised regarding Third Friday. So the content from here on out are all the projections, and we'll spend time walking through that. So definitely do that.
For example, the elementary enrollment, those numbers that you see next to the bars, are those like seats enrollments?
These are kids in seats today. So compared to, for example, Alice, picking on them alphabetical order, they have 69 fewer students at Alice than they did last year by comparison. So this is not these are not projections that we showed. These are slices of current student counts, and these are the students that are sitting. We used to say sitting in classrooms, but actively receiving services from the district. Yep, these are the kids in seats, as we used to call them.
I appreciate that. And then I know at some point we did talk about, I don't remember which meeting we talked about this, but we have raised the concern around, and I saw that with some of Brianna's friends of like kids not being a part of the first month of school. Do you see that is, the change in numbers is changing? So like if we were to do another count in December, like does the numbers changing at all? And then my second question would be about what is there any trends around students with IEPs, or any other like additional category? Like I know you isolated for race, but I'm wondering if like any other category that you see, yeah, also showing some outliers.
Yeah, in reverse order. So the only real shifts we saw for enrollment today versus enrollment last year is among students that were identified as advanced learners or identifying as white. We had fewer of those as a percentage this time. And for students with disabilities, really steady. So 85, 87% at elementary, for example. 84% for middle. So the students with IEPs is really unchanged. The biggest changes we saw were among students identifying as white, and those students identified as advanced learners in elementary in particular. Your first question in order was if we count again, will it be different? We actually do have a count that's coming up in January. So that's where we answer that kind of a question as to what has changed. Now, as long as a student has attended instruction in MMSD, either during Third Friday or before and after, they are captured in these Third Friday numbers. So students that may have missed the entire window up to Third Friday and have not shown up after, those students would not be counted in this snapshot, though they may be current active students anyway. Yeah. So for them to be counted, we have to have kind of evidence that they're receiving services. So that these are the students that we have had engagements with, in other words.
I was mostly curious. I think there is a trend in the state around students with IEPs leaving particular districts. So I'm just gonna be watching closely to see what is happening in Madison. I'm glad to hear that it's not a trend that is happening.
Yeah, Ananda, I can second that. I just met with John this morning. Our special education trends are pretty consistent, as our identifying students processes this year are working seemingly on par.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I have Savian and then Gloria.
Thanks so much, Chris. And I think Ananda may have got this question a little bit, but just digging into the assumption that we see zero return from those who have unenrolled. Can you talk about what the thought process that went into that assumption?
A pretty simple one, but we kicked it around for a long time. And that really is, currently we have nothing to base an assumption on. I can't tell you there would be a 5% or 2% or 100%. So what we're going to do is engage in the surveys and then staff level outreach, kind of decentralized outreach among our school staff and our program staff to connect with families to see what their decision process was and whether or not they would return. With that kind of pre-existing relationship in the field, we can get a read on how many families may come back if we go hybrid or in person next year. It gives us a better idea of what sort of a return rate we may see based on those conversations. It's we don't doubt that we will have return. It's just that today I couldn't tell you what that return rate would look like. So that remains a future study.
Yeah,
Got it. Thank you.
From a budgetary perspective, kind of overestimating for some of those grades would be a pretty big risk until we know a little bit more. And where we spent quite a bit of our time, Andrew's team and mine, looking into is what we do know about where people left. And the fact that such a high percentage was moved, whether it's moved out of state or moved to another city, it just wasn't like the data is telling us, they're all homeschool and are likely to come back. So many of them were moved that it's certainly an area of evidence that we wouldn't have high rates of return.
Got it.
Gloria and then Ollie.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Andrew, for this. And also for including the demographic data, particularly around race and ethnicity. That was something I was concerned about before. And I do see that in high school, particularly, that there was a decrease, as you mentioned, of white students. Right? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, we saw it for both elementary. So 43% last year identifying as white, 41% this year. And then we also saw it 45% versus 43 for high school. Middle school, about a percentage point change, a pretty normal change in middle school.
And then we're seeing with Hispanic Latinx students that trend continues to go up, right? Our enrollment continues to go up in all high schools.
Yeah, the Hispanic Latinx population does increase as a percentage, and that's been a past trend, not a large increase from one year to the next, but a steady trend. Yeah.
So, do these the percentages here, do they concern you at all?
Well, it certainly points out a couple of dynamics. One is given the relationship of free and reduced lunch status and our race ethnic categories, it does suggest that some of our families have financial options to support things like private parochial school, or they may feel better equipped to provide homeschooling or see that as a more viable option. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to explore with the survey and then the staff outreach to families that had a previous enrollment with the district but are not enrolled with us currently. And some of the similar dynamics given the demographics around advanced learners, for example, it's very likely a financial consideration that would enable families to explore other options given the year.
Yeah, and I guess my sort of in a big picture thinking into the future, right? This, dynamic of white flight, and do we see that sort of the beginning stages of this happening right now as we sit here today?
Yeah, I would say looking even deeper, there has been a shift in demographic percentages over time. So I would say that this is certainly unique given the circumstances and one to keep an eye on, and all the more reason for us to try to get our arms around a return rate, because what we do want to have is students living in the district choosing the district first. So that's always been our goal. But in terms of shifts from one year to the next, it's definitely pronounced this year as it relates to the handful of those student groups we described. But it is also part of a very long, slower trend over time.
Thank you for that. I think it would be interesting to see other cities our size, and if they're experiencing the same thing, right? And I guess, my thought around this is how do we better prepare ourselves for the future if this trend continues, and how other cities around our size are, if they're faced with the same issues, and if this year, right, if we see if this year was just an outlier because of COVID and other options in private schools, and see where we go, where we end up in future years.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Great, Ollie, and then Nikki.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's really interesting to look into kind of students who exited the district. I also think there are some underlying trends that we saw even before the pandemic. 2019 was the lowest birth rate year since 1987. So we're talking about some kind of long range projections in terms of early childhood learning, particularly. That being said, the pandemic did shift even the nature of that reality in terms of our youngest students being maybe some of our more likely kiddos to sit out kindergarten or to go for it next year if you're right up against that line. So wondering if we're preparing to see a boom of young people in early childhood next year, especially as we talk about launching something like full day 4K. And then my other question was, in looking at the students who've stayed and the families that have stayed, what are the supports that have allowed for families to stay? I know there are folks who have said, if it weren't for the MSCR full day, programming, it would be really hard for our family to stay in the district because we have to go to work. Can we speak to the supports we're strengthening to allow folks to continue even during the pandemic to participate in education through MMSD and our long-term trends in early childhood and birth rates?
Yeah, thank you. I will respond to the question around 4K and kindergarten, the kind of dynamic there. I'll ask others to weigh in on program supports. As it relates to 4K and K, you're spot on. Madison is not unusual in a declining birth rate about 4, 5, 6 years ago that continues. Millennials were and continue to delay having families. And that has an implication then of fewer births, fewer kids enrolling then in 4K and kindergarten. The great unknown this time, now we described our strategy for contacting families that had a previous enrollment relationship with the district but do not now. There is also a subsection of our community that never had a relationship with us. And these are some of the 4 and 5-year-olds that you're talking about. So we do know that some of them are going to have their kindergarten or their 4K experience either through homeschooling, through another district, or through private parochial, for example, and then be prepared to come back to Madison when we're available. And if they were 4 this year, they'd be a kindergartner next year. Or if they're a 5-year-old this time, they would be joining us as a 1st grader. We expect some of that to happen. We also expect some families to say, well, I have a 4-year-old. No, thank you. Given the circumstances, we're going to sit this one out. And we may see them then either start as 5-year-olds in 4K, or we may see them simply say, well, we're 5, we're going to go to kindergarten instead. So we're going to see this interesting mix based on a lot of individual families' decisions. And those are going to be pretty hard to predict. So this is another thing that we do have on radar, this idea of when the kids come back, which grade, particularly those early grades. And that was the bulk of our enrollment shift from one year to the next. So we expect some changes yet. Yeah.
Thanks, Nikki, and then Chris.
Actually, Ali asked my question. Thank you very much, Ali. So I don't have one anymore.
Thanks, Nikki. Chris?
I'm sorry, do you mind speaking to the more programmatic aspect of my question? Not necessarily you, Andrew, as you said you wanted to pass it on, but I am wondering if Lisa or Kelly would want to speak to that. I'm sorry, I don't see Lisa.
Yeah, I'll kick us off while Lisa or others join in. Obviously, in addition to MSCR Cares, which is serving approximately 800 or so families right now, I think it's important to recognize that citywide, a coalition under 4C child care providers serves 1,000 plus more students in support of families right now. So certainly it's not just MSCR and MSCR Cares that are working to help support families, but it is absolutely a community-wide effort. And in addition to that, I know Nichelle, who may want to jump in the Family Engagement Department, is working to support families, and our social workers are actively in our community, connecting with families, attaching supports. And I know that because I'm constantly getting phone calls around what we can and can't do with district resources to help families, and what we can and can not do as far as connecting families and sharing information. So certainly a lot of effort is on the ground from our school-based personnel with indirect outreach to families. But as far as overall district programming, Nichelle's office is definitely doing a great job reaching out. And then we know our food service team is on the ground and actively supporting from a day-to-day basis. You can layer in our technology services team, who is actively speaking with families daily to problem solve technology needs, but also just to help teach and explain how the programs are working. So there's a lot happening. If anybody else wants to jump in with more information, by all means, but certainly a lot is happening right now to support families.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was a really complete answer to my question.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask that we go on to screen share again.
Hang on, and we still have Chris Gomeschmidt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No
Thank
worries.
You're in the other
Thank you.
corner. Hi.
Thank you, Chris. And thanks, Andrew, for this enrollment report. I guess one of the things that I was just curious about with this zero rate of return assumption from this year, I guess I just want to comment that's why it's so important for us to figure out a way and have a strong plan for getting our youngest learners back in person.
You're
Yeah.
cutting out really badly.
Am I?
Yeah, I wonder if turning off your video would help.
I'll try turning off my video. Okay, how is that?
You're still cutting out pretty badly.
I am.
Something I've done lately is call in through my phone, which improves it dramatically.
Okay, I will duck off here and try again to reconnect.
Okay, and we'll come back to your question when you get back, Chris.
Yeah, you guys can go ahead.
Okay. While we're waiting for Chris, I had one quick question that kind of builds off what Ollie and Sabian asked about our youngest learners, the 4K and kindergartners. And I think one of the challenges we will face as a board is, Ollie and you are absolutely, and Sabian are absolutely right in that we might have a whole bunch of kids who might have redshirted and enter a grade, be a year ahead of their grade, but come in as redshirted students. They might just dive into the grade that they're supposed to be in and skip kindergarten or 4K. And my understanding of enrollment is we won't actually have registration numbers for 4K and kindergarten before we're making decisions about workbooks and allocations in the budget. Is that correct? And if so, is there anything we can do to try to get some information about where we might be headed with allocation needs for 4K and kindergarten, or are we just going to need to kind of like budget some extra unallocated positions and see what happens?
I would say the enrollment number itself, kind of the in total number, even at earlier grades would hold. And really the question is, which side of the line do you put them on? Do you put them on the grade 1, the kindergarten, or the 4K side of the line? So I think what we're talking about is a fine tuning as to which of the buckets kids would end up in. So when we look at this concept of off-age entry into the system, it's a fixed number, and the truth is going to be somewhere between the two numbers I'm going to show you on the next few slides, where we've got a number for K and a 4K. Families will make some decisions as to which pot they want to go into, but in terms of actual count, then at least we have that as a guidepost. And I would say also that our enrollment process for a student to go into kindergarten, for a student to go into first grade, they must be at least 6 years old and have experienced kindergarten, completed kindergarten. So the default would be for students to go into kindergarten instead of grade 1 if they were sitting out their kindergarten year this year. 4K, of course, being optional, they could go directly into kindergarten as a 5-year-old, or do 4K as a 5-year-old. Kelly?
Chris, I want to tie this back to the assumption that Andrew started off with, because it's actually, I think, really important, which is our assumption that we made for 4K and K is that we go back to birth rates. Mm-hmm. That essentially means a 100% return rate. For 4K and K, we're saying COVID impact does not exist. It matters for K in particular as it relates to those red-shirted 4Ks. It's saying they're coming back. and that they're going to kindergarten. And perhaps we may be overestimating at 4K and K in these particular enrollment assumptions. But for those grades, because of the more likelihood for the return rate, because of this choice that parents will have, that's a better place for us to be potentially overestimating than in some of the other grades where we won't necessarily see that kind of impact. So Andrew laid that assumption out there in the beginning, and I just want to tie it to the reason why is exactly tied to your question.
Thanks, Kelly. That's really helpful. Savian, did you have a follow-up to what Kelly just said, or should I let Chris jump in first?
I'm sorry. Yeah, you can let Chris jump in first. Sorry.
Okay. Chris,
But I did have a follow-up related to yours.
okay.
And can you get me up to speed really quick on what you asked, the question you asked?
So I asked about the potential for redshirted 4K and kindergarten students and how we're going to go about basically budgeting for allocations without good information about that. And Kelly explained that by using birth rates, we are essentially like doing the best job we can to allocate for that, because we're not anticipating that there's going to be a drop in those grade levels.
Okay, gotcha. I guess my comment around the zero return rate from the students who either moved or chose some other option for this year, I was just thinking that it's why it's so important for us to have a plan and figuring out how to get our youngest learners back in school, those K-2 learners, for instruction. Obviously, when it's safe to do so, using the metrics we're using to make those decisions and everything, but just keeping our eye on that as we're talking about enrollment and projections for next year too. I guess, Andrew, one of my questions was around the survey and knowing that it's tied into also the January counts. Will it be a survey that your department does? And when will we have this information, and how will it be provided back to the board?
Yeah, we would be conducting the survey out of our PEO, centrally administered in Qualtrics. We would be administering it ahead of winter break. That way we can provide best numbers possible to the budget team to get an idea of what that return rate might look like. The second step then, one is to do the survey. The second then is to turn those same questions over to staff in schools and in our programs that already have existing relationships with families. They may even already know the answers to those questions. But with a shorter list, they then make those contacts and help us round out that understanding even more. So what we would be providing is the roughest possible second Friday count at the January work group. And I say rough because our deadline for submitting second Friday counts of DPI is after the meeting. So it'll be preliminary, but you'll get at least that number with additional detail to then follow in February.
Okay, great. I think that'll be important just to keep an eye on, as we're going forward. One of my other questions, when you mentioned the advanced learning trends, I'm curious, looking at that drop at the elementary level, I'm wondering if that's actually advanced learners who have left at the elementary level, or if that's an issue we're having with identifying advanced learners. I know that in the spring, one of the multiple metrics that is used is the MAP test to identify students, especially at that third grade level when they first take it. And we didn't do that last spring. And so how much of that is an issue with trying to figure out how we're measuring that and how we're finding students?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I should have mentioned that. I am always cautious about describing student groups as identified as. So there is an identification process, of course, and I've had the same curiosity, and this one would have to look at, particularly for that early grade where you really are taking your first battery of assessments to inform that identification. Thank you for bringing that back. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And then the other thing around that data that just jumped out to me was middle school, that 50% of all of our middle schools are identified in some way as an advanced learner. It's lower in elementary and lower in high school. So at some point when we're discussing this, I'd really like to dig into those trends and figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the last comment, just trying to figure out as we're going forward, we talk a lot about disincentives and students leaving, and we're really trying to talk about a way to change narratives. And I'm wondering if we can start talking about incentives for students to join our district and how we're looking at the value of what we're offering students and families in our district. We have an amazing DLI program that has grown over the last 10 years as students progress through school, honors and AP courses at our high schools, opportunities in arts, drama, music, forensics, debate, all those athletics, all those opportunities that we provide for students. And so, I guess just how to fit that into the narrative as well.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. I certainly wouldn't want anyone to think that it's a disincentive to be in the district based on everything that we can offer. Our disincentive is around perceptions of safety and health for students who are attending. The number one disincentive that we've heard cited, at least anecdotally, particularly for the early grades, is when it's safe for you to unlock the building, we'll be there. So I take that to be a pretty serious disincentive for families. And that's what caused us to use that term. But thanks for calling it out. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that.
Sure. All right, so I'm wondering if we can move to.
Well, hang on. Sagan had a follow-up question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I was somewhat related to Chris's question. Could we potentially see students who unenrolled and coming into kindergarten re-enroll and still want to join the kindergarten grade level?
Yeah.
So they would be like old kindergartners if their birthday fit up at the right time.
Yeah. Kind of a kindergarten restart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the concept. Yeah. We'll take that up with the team. Let's see what we can do. Yeah. Okay. We've been talking a bit about the projection, so let's walk through a couple of slides. Barb, if you would like to do a screen share for us. The first one that's going to come up is just a talk through of the adjustments that we had to make to the model. So typically we do a 3-year rolling average. This year we did 5, given the unusual circumstances. We took an unusual step this time, a new step for us, and this was advised by the Applied Population Lab, that if you had an aberrant rate, a large increase or decrease, that you would take that number out. So you'd essentially drop one of those numbers and go with a 4-year average, excluding that one big change. The second thing we have highlighted in the little cell down here is that return rate. So we do have curiosity about what that should look like, and more information will tell us. The 3 line charts you have on here are really just proving a point that on the top line, you've got a trajectory under a normal model. So without COVID-19, due to lower birth rates, we would see our elementary school count declining. You'll notice that the decline to 11,174 is the official count this year, given COVID dynamics. The following year then is really the same trend again. So we're not saying this drastic improvement or this drastic decline. Basically, we're starting our model again, but from a new starting point. So this was just kind of a proof that we ran to make sure that we were creating a model that was reliable and one that made some logical sense. The next slide, please. Next one up then is a visualization of our enrollment projections. So a couple of things do stand out in this. So the dark blue dots are the history, and then the teal colored dot is the projection. So you see that our 4K numbers were kind of coming down, and our kindergarten numbers kind of hovering about the same, but our 4K going down, and again, because of birth rates. You then see that last blue dot indicating a pretty big decrease for 4K in kindergarten. And as we described to the board, about half of our elementary loss was in those 2 grades. So the next dot then you have is kind of returning back to that trend. So this is the visualization of that assumption. What we had for 4K and kindergarten trends based on birth rates will return. So this represents a one-time decline in 4K in kindergarten. The rest of our grades are actually quite normal by comparison. So these are, again, looking at our counts today and adjusting as we would normally see students progressing as a cohort from one grade to another. The only other one that stands out then is grade 12 with an increase. Now, a couple of things to recognize about grade 12. Every year from grade 11 to grade 12, we've got an increase of about 200 students in the count. It's in the count. It's not an increase of 200 students. It's 200 students in the count. This increase from one year to the next of about 200 students represents students staying past 4 years. They'd become a 5-year graduate or a 6-year graduate, or have the ability under state law to continue to receive IEP services until 22nd birthday. So 200 of these year-to-year changes from grade 11 to 12, 11 to 12, 11 to 12 every year, a couple hundred students. This time it's unusual because we have a bit of a bulge in the enrollment. So we've got a student body of about 100 students more in grade 12 than we had in grade 11. And that was about 100 students more in grade 11 than the previous grade 10, and so on. So it's just it's a large cohort that's making its way through. These two things come together and make that grade 12 number look really big. Next up then is just a table of the same thing. You got more numbers. Some folks like tables, some like lines. And those next steps then, that family survey we talked about, trying to better understand our enrollment decisions and intentions to inform our return rate as well as programmatic decisions. Working with principals and school staff to help fill in the gaps where that survey might not capture everyone's sentiments. Definitely taking a look at Second Friday this year in ways we never have before, and then revisiting our enrollment projections based on those two pieces of evidence, based on Second Friday count and based what we're learning about the return rate from that survey and outreach effort. We will also issue kind of downsized versions of our class size capacities and transfers. Again, looking at probably February or January to get those to the board in time for some decisions around allocations. And then consulting with DLI and DBE staff to make sure that we've got the split between ELI and DLI DBE locations set. So that's the rest of the presentation, the projection itself, and all of those next steps. We want to come off a screen share bar.
All right, any questions for Andrew? I guess I can get us started with a couple. Andrew, could you, I don't know if we can put the slides back up for a moment, but I'd like to look at the adjusting projection models for COVID-19 slide again.
Yeah, that's slide 8. There we go.
Oh.
One forward, Barb.
One forward.
There we go.
So I think this slide is really important. And I'm really glad that we worked with the Applied Population Lab on this modeling. I think this gives us really good information for both short-term and longer-term budgeting in the district. If you look at the 3 graphs, you've basically got this COVID gap, I don't know what else to call it, between what we were projecting enrollment to be before COVID and what we're actually seeing and projecting after COVID. And that gap is significantly larger at the elementary level than at the middle and high school levels. And if, you know, I'm kind of curious, is that gap something we anticipate will tighten up over time as we return to in-person instruction, or is that gap going to persist? Because if it persists, it's actually going to have budget implications for a lot longer than if we were seeing that gap at middle school or high school. And I'm wondering if you or Kelly could talk a little bit about do we anticipate seeing that gap persist over the years, or will it tighten up? And what does that mean for budgeting?
Yeah, I would say first from a modeling standpoint, and then turn it over to Kelly. The idea of a return rate helps us understand how much that gap might then close. So there may be an adjustment that we can make yet this year as it relates to next year's projection that does suggest a constriction of that. The other thing I would say about it is, you know, the multi-year impacts of budgeting formulas, and turning it over to Kelly then, it's something that'll play itself out given the multi-year nature of those formulas.
Right. I guess the part I'd want to zone in on is when you look at that 11,017 in comparison to the 11,359, about 240 kids there. I kind of like to point back to our open enrollment numbers too. We had 150 students net open enroll out, which means it was a lot bigger number of just open enrolling out. And a good portion of those were also in elementary. Based on where it looks like some of those open enrollments are going, we may get some back, but our trends are such that if we lose students to open enrollment out, we don't tend to get them back. They tend to be gone and into another district for the duration of their time. Sometimes we get them back in high school because of the wide variety of our programming, but typically we wouldn't get them back in elementary. So I do think some of this gap is going to persist. And I think Andrew's model is starting to play some of that out. Certainly we will get more information second Friday. Certainly we will get more information in enrollment. Remember that 4K enrollment is earlier than regular enrollment. So we'll get data to know, but I do think this COVID gap, at least a solid portion of it is unfortunately probably going to stay based on looking at how previous trends have played out.
Thanks for that, Kelly and Andrew. And I assume as we move into the budget conversations, we'll see how that translates into revenue projections. We can turn off the slide sharing now, I think, but I just had a couple other questions. Andrew, I really appreciate the level of detail you provided in this report in terms of school by school enrollment trends, the little dot graphs you provided. One thing I noticed, and it's hard to tell from the limited number of years of data that was in those graphs, but we have some schools that appeared to have fairly steady enrollment, and then COVID dropped the enrollment numbers. And we had other schools that looked like enrollment was declining before COVID. And I'm wondering if, maybe not tonight, but at some point as a board, we could dig into that a little bit more, because COVID is absolutely having an impact on enrollment. And I think we have other enrollment considerations that go beyond COVID. And I think as a board, we need to take the long-term view of, do we have places in the district where we've had declining enrollment for several years as opposed to right now? And do we have places in the district where, because of changes in open enrollment trends, we might anticipate seeing declines in enrollment that aren't just about COVID? And thinking about what we need to do as a district to try to address those declines and keep kids, or understand that, declining birth rates or changes in home ownership in certain neighborhoods and parts of town are actually impacting enrollment at specific schools. I don't know if you guys want to comment just on how we might go about thinking on that level.
Thank you. Yeah, when Grady produced various looks at our enrollment changes at the school level, one of them was changes relative to projection, which is effectively what you're talking about, because our model is built on past performance, except this time. But a model built on past performance, of course, builds in and recognizes then a declining enrollment at a particular location. Also looking not just at the comparison to actuals, but comparison to projections, they really, really closely matched. The top 5 schools that we saw in declines were the top 5 we were going to see in the projections as declines. So we're seeing, quite frankly, some changes that are occurring under COVID-19 that are exacerbating trends we had already seen. So those are some of the things that we did look at in addition to comparison to actuals, but it's actually tracking quite close to projections as well.
I think the part I wanted to maybe trigger some memory on is we've had quite a few discussions on enrollment trends through our long-range facility planning conversations. And it is the reason we did the 20-year enrollment look that Andrew's team put together, because sometimes neighborhoods just go through cycles. And it's incredibly important of age cycles. And it's incredibly important to look at our longer term perspective and not just a 1, 2, or 3 year trend as it relates to certain schools. You can see neighborhoods turn over in age in kids And you have to look at the whole picture. But certainly that's been part of the long range facility planning conversation for 2 to 3 years now. And it will continue to be part of that overall work moving forward as well.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that. In particular, I think it would be really good to look at the allied neighborhood. I don't think we've had conversations about what changes in that neighborhood mean for our schools. So that would be a good place to focus our energy, particularly through an equity lens.
Yeah,
My final comment is just about the class size reporting. That's actually one report that is specified in board policy. So I am hopeful that we will follow our board policy and get class size reports. I totally understand that we need to be flexible because our PEO is crushed by modeling and projections and other work right now, just to try to tread water and provide Kelly the information she needs to pull a budget together. But we do need to get that class size information before we start talking about allocations. So thank you so much for all you are doing. Gloria.
Yeah, just to thank you, Chris. Just to go off of the long range facilities discussion, how are we working with our jurisdictions that are nearby? Verona, Sunbury, Fitchburg, in sort of planning all this right together as our districts are moving really close together. Our boundaries are really close. I know Fitchburg has a lot of, their plans, and I'm just wondering how we are really looking at this as more of a comprehensive plan in partnership and discussions with the other jurisdictions. Are we?
Yeah, the 20-year projections are our own geography. So any of the dynamics playing out in City of Fitchburg, for example, are factored into those longer term, longer range projections. I would say that we've had some early conversations with other districts, Verona in particular, about Allied Drive. We've made the observation that community needs to be better served by either of the two districts or both of us. So that's one that we have not gotten a lot of headway on recently, given circumstances, but then also given our focus then on the Rimrock Road area and recognizing then that schools just across borders have influences on open enrollment and families moving. So some of those realities are playing out in the recently approved referendum. Other properties that we have close to borders, Sprecher Road, which we've had for some period of time, Acacia Ridge north of Olson, all of those are development opportunities that, as you describe, are very close to borders, and theirs are close to ours. So those definitely informing strategies moving forward for potential elementary constructions, school construction.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how we do it, right? I mean, I think given the political nature of how we work together for the best interest of our students to ensure that they are close to a neighborhood school, that there's not, we minimize the travel to school. But I'm just wondering how we can work and really lead this effort in really thinking big picture and bringing our other, neighbors together to really think about sort of those boundaries, like, Sunbury and, instead of I see us really moving towards okay, this year we're going to do this, or the next 2 or 3 years, but really what does our district look like in the next 20 years, right, given how close we are with the other districts. And so I think if we were to have a set foundation of what it would look like, it would minimize sort of the changes, minimize as transition happens, right, on school boards and city councils and mayors in our surrounding districts. And so just, I don't know what that looks like, but maybe a multi-jurisdictional sort of plan around, building our schools into the future. Am I just dreaming? Like, is this just like that something like that could happen?
Yeah, no, I would say that, first of all, I've always been interested and open to having conversations with other districts as it relates to land swaps. It's something that we do out of our legal services shop and that the board sees with frequency. So there are some of those calculus sessions to figure out how to best serve families in those areas. Of course, at their heart, districts like to grow their enrollment. So those are, that's a backdrop for the conversations, but we're all in agreement that we're trying to serve the families in the community the best.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, always open to additional opportunities and perspectives. When we see them, we take them to other districts as well. So that collaboration is happening, at least in spirit, even if it's not resulting in a lot of concrete action from one year to the next.
Chris? Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here on Gloria's comments. First of all, there are opportunities like that that exist out already in the country, and people come together on regional centers. And a lot of times you see it in the articulated skilled trades, but there's been discussion too about doing it in the early learning spaces, because those contiguous districts just recognizing just what we have with Verona as well. And district staff have been in conversation with Verona, and then it was a pause as we were having transition here in terms of superintendent, but not necessarily as you were describing, but the conversations there. And I do think that's something that could pick up and will, times is just going to dictate that as we move forward, as we think about how we're going to be trying to serve all of our children, particularly when you try to get the children not riding buses for a long time on the edge of each community. It may be a discussion worth having, because it haven't happened yet, doesn't mean that it can't happen. Bottom line, just stay open.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I appreciate that. I mean, I think if you look at other cities, right, other districts and how it has impacted their communities, right? Milwaukee, other bigger cities, where you're so close to boundaries with other communities. And I'm not sure how the planning is done, but you do find that students are traveling long distance, on top of people working, having to get on a bus and be on a bus for, an hour, 2 hours to get to work. But that's where we see ourselves, right? We are so close to all these smaller jurisdictions that, it would be helpful to have a multi-jurisdictional type planning effort that would include, city, county, and other, representatives to really plan the future in partnership with each other.
Tully, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Other questions? Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jenkins and Gloria. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm really grateful for this discussion. Thank you so much, Andrew, for bringing us this information and for giving us the chance to talk about enrollment. Gloria, I really, really appreciate that you kind of guided us toward the long view here. I think we need to continue these enrollment discussions, get them on the calendar every year. COVID is the priority at the moment. However, we need to take the long-term view as well and continue talking about the very things you brought up. How do we work with contiguous districts on enrollment issues? What are the trends that we're seeing on the boundaries, and how can we work together to make sure that all kids are getting the services they need and an education that's equitable, on both sides of the line. Thank you. we will move on to our next agenda item, which is the employee handbook, and I'll invite Deirdre to join us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Grady.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Chris. I'm hoping this can be a short and sweet summary and check-in for the board. But we wanted to just come and give just a quick status update on how it is that we're progressing with the handbook language changes. So as you all recall, back in July, we had a pretty robust conversation specific to the handbook changes related to surplus and layoff. And at that time, you gave us a directive to go back and continue discussions and really focus on 3 areas. First one being a rubric that we could use specific to the surplus and layoff decisions, an appeal process, and rewriting the language specific to the 30-day notice. The expectation was that we would bring that proposal back in November, and that's why we're here. But we wanted to let the board know that we're continuing to have conversations. Our conversations are going really well, but what we're finding is that this is a little bit more complex than we anticipated in terms of really developing a rubric. So we wanted to be able to continue to have our joint committee meet and continue progressing and not rush this process. So we're providing you with this update to let you know that we're going to continue in our discussions, and it really is our plan to come back in January to present the final written language changes and the final rubric at that point. So that's our update. Wanted you to know things are going well, we're progressing, but we just need more time. So I'll pass it back to you, Chris, and see if there are any questions from the board.
Thanks, Deirdre. I see Ollie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Deirdre, for both the update and for engaging in this long-term effort to make sure that our students have the best teachers in front of them, and also making sure that folks of color are not the last people hired and the first people fired in this district. What you're doing is really important work for our young people and for our community. And I appreciate your leadership and your collaboration and the approach you've taken to doing this. And I'm grateful that you all are taking the time to really work together and hear one another out. So if there is any way that the board can support that work and that dialogue, I think it would be helpful for you to let us know and to speak to how we can participate in ways that are effective and strengthen the collaboration.
Yeah, we certainly will. It's been a great process and great conversations up to this point. So we're all feeling really good about it.
Other questions or remarks? Chris.
Yeah, thank you for this work, and thank you for recognizing the complexity of the rubrics that you're trying to develop and the collaborative process that you're going through to do that. I think that's so important. I'm curious if we have found examples of rubrics from other districts that we're using as a model, or ones that have worked, or if this is something we're having to create from scratch. It seems like there might be some models out there that would be robust and good to use. Just kind of curious where we are in the process of that.
Yeah, we're actually starting from scratch initially. We've had some conversations. There have been a couple rubrics that have been designed and developed, and we've been talking back and forth. We haven't reached out and looked for any specific examples at this point. We wanted to start those initial conversations and just see where we could land in terms of sort of middle ground. But I appreciate the ask, and we certainly will see if there are any examples that we can learn from.
That would be great. I just encourage us to not reinvent the wheel entirely if there are some good ones out there that have worked, and there is some evidence to that case. So thanks for all the work on this.
I'd like to chime in and agree that, I'm really grateful that you're taking the extra time to allow the collaborative process to continue to happen and hopefully mature and result in a good product that everybody's in agreement with. I do have a question about the fact that we don't have a 2020-21 handbook in place. Does the current handbook just continue to be our handbook until we approve a new one?
Yep, that's exactly right.
And I just want to review the handbook revision process that I think is in the handbook, and you can clarify that for me if I'm wrong. But the process is that you guys bring to us what you're going to do, and then we vote, correct? Like, it's a two-step process.
Correct. So we bring the recommendations to the superintendent, and then the superintendent makes decisions about which recommendations will go forward. And then those will be the ones that you all will vote on.
Okay, and we will see recommendations mid-January for a late January vote is the timeline at this point? Okay.
Yep, that's the timeline we're looking at.
All right, thank you so much. Gloria.
Deirdre, what strategies are you using to work with MTI on this? Oftentimes it's the process, right, that really is important when we are working through some of these issues. And so wondering what strategies, what specifically is the process, and does MTI understand where we're trying to go? Like, our concern on the board has been the seniority specifically issue, right? And not losing our teachers, our staff of color due to seniority when we have to lay off or, and so forth. I mean, do they understand that part of it? And are they open to what that looks like?
Yeah, so Gloria, I'm so glad you asked that question, because we have developed a process within the district where we're checking in and connecting with MTI on a very regular basis. So we have executive MMSD MTI meetings that happen every other week. We invite them to both our operations and our instruction meetings so that they're getting regular updates specifically about how it is that we're moving forward with virtual instruction and our plans for reopening. In addition to that, we've got the surplus handbook specific meetings that are happening on a very regular basis as well. So we're having a lot of touch points with MTI, and then specifically with this, that group is coming together. We're having discussions, and then if it's necessary, there'll be a smaller work group that'll come together and sort of problem solve some of those things. So we have a really, I feel really good about the tight connection that we have with MTI. We're working through that. I think that we're all in agreement that this is important language that needs to be changed and needs to move forward. And it really is about how do we come to agreement on the rubric and that piece of it. So I feel good about it. I think that we've got a good process. Andy and I check in on a pretty regular basis. So I'm confident with how it is that we're connecting. And I think the real key is that we're just having regularly scheduled meetings that are happening, and we're trying to ramp those up so that they're happening on a weekly basis. So once we get to the finish line, if we've got to increase that and have more frequency there, we certainly can do that. But I think as far as our relationship and how we're building our relationship, that is very positive, and we've got a lot of touch points where we're staying connected.
No, that's great to hear, Deirdre. Thank you for that. I think, oftentimes, just from my experience, is that, unions really focus on the majority, right? The big, their members, right? The majority of members. And so I think that this is really an opportunity, right, for their members to really support racial equity. And I think I don't know of any other city who has really pushed or unions, right, who have really touched on this. If you look at unions across the board, across the country, and their influence in this work, right, and protecting the rights of their members, which is really, really important. But now we are really moving towards an opportunity to really focus on racial equity and equity within their membership, right? And it is like that picture that I think we've all seen, right? Equality versus equity, right? And Ananda, you can, and Ali, right? Where, you are given the same sort of platform to oversee the fence, right? But some may need more, a bigger platform than others. And I just think it's a real, an opportunity for MTI and other unions really to explore this as is really moving forward and reimagining what equity means for their members, right? Some members may need more, and how do you make it fair and equitable? And so I just, it really is. I'm excited. I'm really excited because I think that we are doing the hard work that I think most districts probably would have just walked away and either voted and then it not passed and then but you are doing the hard work, Deirdre, and Dr. Jenkins, thank you for really having these tough conversations and pushing us to be better. And so, thank you for that.
Yeah, I would say just a really quick shout out to Dr. Jenkins, because I think he really set the tone for how it is that we're coming together and working collaboratively. And that's really, really important. I don't think there's one meeting that I've had that we haven't specifically talked about race and equity and how important that is. So I just wanted to appreciate him because I think he's really been a catalyst for how it is that we've been moving forward and strengthening our relationship. So it's important.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Change is messy and the status quo is pretty stubborn. So I can't commend y'all enough, Deirdre, Dr. Jenkins, our partners at MTI, for sticking through this process and staying committed to change for the betterment of our students. And I know how hard that your department works to especially increase our staff of color. The last time I checked, we had a goal of increasing staff of color 60%. And last I checked, we were about 88% to that goal. So just really critical work, and thank you so much.
Additional questions or comments? Dr. Jenkins.
Yes. First of all, just thank you to all of you. I'll just be really honest. This is where I wanted to be, right here in Madison Metropolitan School District. Level of conversation that you guys are having now on this particular topic. It's one thing to say we're an anti-racist district. It's another thing to actually live up to it. And I have to say, Deirdre is really underscoring her leadership in this. And she has been phenomenal working with MTI on this. Andy and Ed both coming to the table. And I meet with them every Friday along with Dr. McGregory. And they come back from her meetings excited. It's a positivity. And I want you to know, MTI understand what's at stake here, and they want to be a part of this. And Deirdre, relentless, pushing in the conversations before and now. It's just a great team to work with. And I believe we're going to bring back to you in January something that can be sustainable, that we all can be in agreement about, that's going to be great for children. That's the end game. It will be great for children at the end of the day. It'll be great for our staff of color who will not only be the last hired, it won't be the last hired and first fired. We won't continue with that. practice. Thank you, Deidre.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for those comments. I think that's a great note to reach the end of our last agenda item on, unless anybody has any final questions or comments before we wrap it up. Not hearing any. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, Ali Muldrow.
Thanks. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
A.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for a really good discussion, and see you.
Good night. Thanks so much, Chris.
Good night.